pressure of trying to be the perfect parent is really crushing, actually.
Yeah.
Overnight, you're expected to be, you know, the font of all knowledge, have complete understanding of this small dependent. And I think that's unrealistic.
Welcome to another episode of Squiggly Motherhood, and I'm so excited to have this conversation today. Parenting is often described as the hardest job in the world, but what makes that job even harder is that most of us don't start with a blank slate. We carry a blueprint shaped by our own childhood experiences that quietly influences how we react to our kids in the moments of stress, frustration, or even joy. Together, we'll explore how our past shapes the way we show up as parents, why reflection matters more than perfection, and how we can course correct when old patterns resurface. So, if you've ever found yourself wondering, why did I react that way? Or why am I feeling these feelings because of how my child behaved? Or wishing you could parent differently than your instincts sometimes allow, then this is exactly where you need to be, because this conversation is just for you. I'm lucky enough to be joined by Shivani, an NHS consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist based in London. She has over a decade of experience working across a range of services supporting young people with their significant emotional and behavioural challenges. She completed her medical studies at Oxford University and then went on to train to be a psychiatrist. Shivani often says that her greatest teachers have been the families that she has had the privilege to work with throughout her career. Welcome, Shivani.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the Squiggly Motherhood podcast. We're just going to dive straight into the questions. From your experience, what does it mean to say parents have a blueprint from their own childhood? Just talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. So I suppose one of the things that we think a lot about when we're in clinic is what might be driving a system, or why a family might be stuck in the way that they are. And I guess one area that we think a lot about is how parents choose to parent. And in a large number of cases, this is not necessarily a super conscious process. You don't necessarily know why you're doing the things that you're doing. But what we do know is that there is some sort of guide, there is some sort of model in parents' minds that help them make the decisions, that help form the patterns that form between parents and their children. And I guess the concept of there being a blueprint is certainly one that's been around for a very long time. And I guess the seminal paper, which was Ghosts in the Nursery, that was written in 1975. And if you're a trainee psychiatrist, everybody has to read the paper. It's a really key thing. But I guess it's talking about how those experiences that you would have had are very, very likely to show up in your parenting later on. And you might not always be aware of it. And I think that's why this is kind of a really important topic to be talking about.
Okay. So I guess what's the sort of behaviors or traits or thinking that you may have had kind of as a child yourself growing up that then kind of seeps in, bleeds in, or comes into when you're a parent and you're raising your children?
I mean, it can show up in lots of ways. And I have to say that although I guess the things that we're probably a bit more focused on clinically are where it's unhelpful traits, there are lots of helpful things that get passed on as well. And for lots of parents, the reason that they want to be parents is because they want to pass that on, the good stuff that they had. But I guess if we're thinking about behaviours that might have been unhelpful, if you were a child who was very heavily criticised, you might be very anxious as a parent, or you might be also very critical of your child. And you might not mean to, but actually this is something that's kind of repeating. You might have been a parent who received very little attention when you were growing up. And actually, in your mind, when you're then responding to your child, when you're then kind of forming a bond with your child, perhaps the ability to kind of give attention to your child in the way that you might want might not be there. Okay. And I suppose this is sort of one of the things that we think a lot about when we have mothers who may have experienced very significant postnatal depression, for example, and may not have realised that, for example, when they were infants, that actually their own mothers might have really struggled as well. So actually, sometimes when we're having these conversations with parents, there's gaps in kind of their own knowledge about what happened to them as a child, which is really important to fill that in so that they can start to understand why they might be experiencing what they're experiencing now that they're in the role of being a parent.
Yeah, and I'm curious as to whether, like, and I use this phrase, do parents deep what it means to be a parent? Like, do they fully understand, like, grasp the weight of it? And so I wonder whether, you know, many parents have done that work to kind of go back into their past, to understand kind of their childhood, understand what's kind of happened and how that has therefore impacted them as a parent and in the ways that they parent. And if parents want to do that and are curious about doing that, how do you kind of do that work as to kind of like going back, understanding what's happened and then understanding how that is then plays a part in how you parent with your children?
I suppose in my experience, I think a lot of parents might do that, but often when things have probably reached a bit of a fever pitch at home, when things are in a bit of a crisis situation and there has to be some thinking about how do we move on. And I guess my view is that it's a helpful practice to be doing regardless of the current situation in your home. Thinking about how you make that connection between your own experiences and what you're doing in the present, I think is a really valuable thing to do. I just don't think it's something that people ordinarily do when you're very busy. You've got 101 things to do. It's kind of unusual probably to sit down and actually really, really do that thinking. But I do think that it's a very helpful thing to be able to do. I guess thinking a little bit about sort of how to do that. I suppose the first thing is like any reflection or like any kind of exercise that you may want to do, you need to find the time, you need to make the time. And that is perhaps easier said than done as a busy parent. And it's often the thing that can really fall off your to-do list is actually to kind of sit down and have some time for reflection and really do some thinking. But I think you have to find a time to you have to carve that out. I suppose one of the things that I find helpful to do might just be going for a long walk, for example, or sitting down with a notebook and actually maybe thinking through something that might have happened earlier in the week and why you responded in the way that you responded. And we do this a lot with families actually that we see in clinic. And I guess the big pushback that we often get is, well, we don't have time. How are we going to possibly fit this in with all of the other things that's expected of us? So I think even getting to a point where that's even possible, I think is a really big step in the right direction. And affording yourself that time as a parent, I think is a really healthy investment.
Yeah, and I like how you said that they're like a healthy investment. And I think that is it. I wonder whether it's a case of I don't have time or I don't want to make the time, because to sit there and kind of do that reflective work, it is hard and it is challenging. And sometimes you do have to kind of sit with a level of uncomfortability. And an example that's coming to my mind, so I have a therapist. So she kind of is able to kind of facilitate and help me with some of those conversations I have with her around some of the things I'm thinking, whether it's related to do with the kids or not. And I'm thinking of a time in particular when, I will share this. I think of a time in particular when we have a stair gate at the top of our stairs, and my daughter, who was 2 at the time, she would just open it and if it was closed, she'd open it, go up and down, and no issue there. And I would say to her, no, don't open it now, or I trusted her, a 2-year-old, that she was going to be able to know when and when not to open the gate. And so one time I left her and my son upstairs. The gate was closed. I went downstairs to go and I think it was to get snacks for them or something. And all of a sudden I hear boom, 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 boom. And I didn't even know what happened, but all I know is my daughter opened the gate and I saw my son at the bottom of the stairs and he was crying. And so my initial reaction was I was really angry. I was like, what are you doing? You know you shouldn't open the gate. Why did you open the gate for? Blah, blah, blah. And then she was upset and crying. And then, she was saying, oh, I'm sorry, Mummy, it's my fault. I hurt my brother and all this other stuff. And, I found it really hard in that moment to have any real sympathy. Because I was like, my son's really upset and he's hurt himself and et cetera, et cetera. And it was only through, and again, I'm fortunate because I have a therapist, so I was able to kind of I brought that into the session and I was able to kind of reflect with her. And it was through doing that reflection that I realised, well, actually, a 2-year-old probably shouldn't have that responsibility of being able, of knowing when to and not to open the gate. And that there needs to be clear boundaries that me and my husband put in place as to, you either always open the gate and we trust you with that, and my son may or may not fall down the stairs, or you never open the gate, and this is a responsibility that's only for an adult because you are 2 years old. And also then to kind of go back and do a little bit of reparative work with her to kind of flesh out some of those things that she was saying. So like me apologizing for shouting at her, and then also looking at, we had a few conversations around, you know, she was like, this is my fault. I hurt my brother. So again, that took a bit of time doing that work with her to help her understand that actually it is never your responsibility to look after your brother. That's always going to be your mum and your dad. And so that weight and responsibility doesn't like fall on you. But I don't think I would have gotten to that place and really sitting with like a lot of the reflectiveness, doing the hard work of accepting actually I made a mistake by leaving them upstairs, doing all of that. Like, I'm not sure whether I would have gotten there without my therapist or without having that time to kind of really think, okay, how have I made this mistake and how could I do better or show up differently for the kids? So I guess I say that story because I'm thinking like, yeah, are there any kind of, for those who maybe don't have therapists, like, yeah, like how do you kind of do that nitty gritty and then also sit with that uncomfortable, like, oh, as a parent, you made a mistake, which I think for me, I definitely felt guilty and bad that I not so much shouted, but that I put so much responsibility on a 2-year-old.
Well, I guess, I mean, thank you for sharing that for a start, because I appreciate that might not have necessarily been an easy story to share.
Yeah.
But I guess, you know, I suppose I would think a little bit about, you know, this idea of the mistakes to start off with. One of the things that I'm curious about is kind of when you have that instant reaction to something, because I suppose this links back into kind of what the blueprint is in a way, or kind of what our thinking. I'm using that as a kind of a shorthand to talk about it. But I suppose in that instant moment, you've got a response to your child.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily choosing that response to your child. That's something that's just kind of in there. And so I think the mistake would be probably not to do the thinking about what's gone on and to do the repair work afterwards. That would be my view. And I think sometimes...
Sorry, just to go straight to the repair without kind of doing that. Well, why did I behave in that way?
Well, to pretend it never happened.
Oh, okay.
And I think this is where a lot of parents who might experience a lot of shame from things that have happened, which for parents can often feel just really automatic, right? You respond in a certain way and you might not necessarily know or have predicted that you were going to respond in that way. And I think for lots and lots of parents, in the busyness of everyday life, or perhaps because it's painful and it's difficult to talk about, you don't. And you may not have that conversation with your child where you say to them, actually, it's not your responsibility. And this is a shared thing that we need to think about as a family, and understanding what the consequences of that might be later on. To me, that's the mistake. Okay. The mistake is, it's, you know, I think the idea that there is the perfect parent who's just hanging around, if they're there, I'd love to meet them, because they don't exist. They don't exist. We are humans who suddenly have children. You know, it's a really, and I do just think about parenting being this very bizarre and unique kind of experience that overnight you're expected to be, you know, the font of all knowledge, have complete understanding of this small dependent. And I think that's unrealistic. Yeah. You know, and we have this concept, kind of another one of the golden things that you get given in training in terms of thinking about would be, you know, the good enough mother. And this idea that actually it's built in that these mistakes, that these things are going to happen. I think what is really helpful is to think about, where does the repair come from? How does one start to repair?
Yeah.
And I think if you're not in a position to be able to acknowledge where things may have gone a bit wrong, it's then very difficult to then do the repair afterwards.
Okay, yeah.
So I think in a way, I don't think that it is at all helpful or fair to say to parents, we expect you to be, you just embody calmness all the entire time. You'll be the font of wisdom the entire time. I don't think that that's realistic. And I think the pressure of trying to be the perfect parent is really crushing, actually.
Yeah.
It's really crushing and probably will impair your ability to be able to connect with your child. So I guess that's kind of my thinking on that. So I do think it's really helpful for people who do see therapists, if they find that that's a helpful thing to kind of carry on as kind of as a practice. But if that isn't quite what you want, and there'll be lots of parents who don't necessarily want or need to see a therapist, I still think that process of being able to kind of sit down and assess how things have been, and if you wanted something to be different, how that could happen, is within everyone's gift. I do believe that. I just think you have to be in the frame of mind to be able to kind of do that. And I think given how stressful parenting is for a lot of parents, that's not always so easy to do.
And it is, and I agree, it is not always easy to do because there's so much stress. And this is something that I want to touch on after I ask this question, but parenting has become such a verb. And so there's so much that falls under the list of like parenting, things that my mum says to me, I was never doing that. like I was never doing that with toddlers, or I was never doing all of this, all the stuff that you're doing right now. I was not doing that for two, like making cakes. I was not baking the cake with you when you were two. I just feel like there's a lot of stuff that we're expected to do, or from a very, very young age. So I want to touch on that, but just bringing it back to kind of the reparative work, I guess I'm curious to know your thoughts. I feel like I'm going to be like picking your brain so much, but I'm curious to know if a parent repeats the same kind of behavior, that shouting, for example, or I don't know what else it could be. I'll use the example of shouting for now. And they shout at their child, they say sorry, but then it's something that happens on a weekly basis, or, it continues to happen. I guess, how do you kind of move on from doing the reparative work and saying sorry to making changes in your behavior, so you're able to kind of go, okay, I can, like as a parent, you're standing back and you're going, I can notice themes that every time when I'm hungry, like I end up like shouting, or every time when my child does, I don't know, smacks their sibling, I don't know, does something, it triggers me, triggers like an angry response, and how is a parent able to kind of pinpoint those themes so the sorry doesn't lose weight?
Well, I think you have to spend a lot of time thinking about why. I think the why is really important. And if there are circumstances where you're more likely to lose your temper than at other times, to really think about what that might be about. It might not be obvious. It might be that there's something about this specific situation. If you're seeing your children hitting each other, and you have a sense of kind of feeling really out of control, or really feeling like you're not going to be able to be effective in that moment, that might link to something that's happened to you or you had seen when you were growing up, but you can't quite make the link until you really think about it. But I think if you're noticing that there are very specific things that are kind of making one feel more on edge than at other points, I think that's a really important thing to kind of acknowledge, and to then be curious as to about why. I think it's really helpful to kind of talk to people who've known you for a long time as well, who might be able to have other perspectives as to why this specific thing, you might be experiencing this specific thing in a certain way. But I think trying to do this in a non-judgmental way towards the parent is a helpful thing to do. And I think coming through it from an angle of curiosity rather than criticism is a really helpful thing to do. Because in a way, if that's not confronted, if that's not really thought about as to why it is this specific thing that keeps really taking it out of me, you will keep doing it. You will keep doing it because you've not really kind of done the real thinking. And I guess like saying sorry is sort of what we're automatically taught, aren't we, from children? Like you do something, you say sorry, the problem goes away.
Yeah.
But the thing is kind of behaviour doesn't lie, does it? It's
like, behaviour is a language.
Right. And if it keeps happening and it keeps happening, in a way the saying sorry isn't really getting rid of the problem, and it isn't really making the other person feel that kind of the reparative work is happening. It doesn't make your child feel like, oh, they really understand what they need to do. And I suppose from my experience from working with children, children tend to be very appreciative when their parents have kind of actually sat down and been like, oh, that's the vulnerability here. This is where I'm going wrong. They're probably more appreciative of that because it's kind of the start of actually changing things than just automatically saying sorry. And then actually things always stay the same.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we think a lot about this in cases where things feel really stuck in clinic. And we'll have kids who'll say, well, they always say they're sorry, but then they do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And the parent might say the same about their child. They say that they won't do it again and then do exactly the same thing. So you can really get stuck in something.
Okay.
And I think just taking kind of a bit more of a compassionate and curious stance, stepping back and really thinking about actually what might be behind this is a helpful thing. And if it's appropriate, a helpful thing to share with your child as well. If that's something to say, well, actually, this isn't really about you. Like in that moment, I might feel really powerless, and I might feel a bit powerless because when I was younger, perhaps I saw people who were fighting and it was really scary for me. And now when I see you fighting, my mind goes to that place. So it isn't really about the fact that you're hitting your brother or, that you're squabbling with the neighbour or whatever. I think that those conversations are much more powerful in a way because it's explaining something to a child. And kids are very canny, right? Like they really, even very, very young children, I think they really want to know the truth.
Yeah.
And they kind of know when you're not telling the truth.
Yeah.
You can't get away with it, really.
I agree.
So I think that's one of the things that even 3-year-olds, and you think, oh,
yeah.
in their way, they kind of, I think it helps them understand that they're safe.
Yeah.
So I think that that's kind of one of the things that we often speak to parents about who might sometimes not want to kind of, have these conversations with their children because they're worried that they're going to make it worse. And I guess we often say to them, well, actually, your kid probably knows you a lot better than you think that they know you. They really are, they're reflections of you in so many ways. So just have that in mind.
Yeah. I guess for me, I find that quite interesting, that vulnerability piece, and like saying to your child, oh, do you know, I'm really struggling with this and it's nothing to do with you. And basically having that open and transparent conversation, because I think a lot of people listening weren't brought up in homes or houses where their parents did that. That wasn't like kind of modeled to them. So for me, that feels quite interesting that you said that. I will say to my toddler at times, like, Mummy's feeling really sad today. And she'll be like, why? And I'm like, I don't know. I'll be like, I don't know. Or maybe I'll be like, I might say to her, oh, just work. Or, I might give her a real reason or kind of change it slightly depending on what it is. But I will be quite open with her around kind of, I don't like to call it good emotions and bad ones because I don't necessarily believe in that. But for the purpose of this, okay, bad, sadness, bad emotions, if that's how it wants to be labelled. And so I think there's definite value in that, in her seeing her parents experience all emotions and for them to be kind of open in the air, in the household, that kind of thing. So I guess there's vulnerability there. I guess, do you think that sometimes parents can feel less comfortable sharing those vulnerable moments because the parent's meant to be the leader of the house and show strength, and that maybe showing some of those vulnerabilities could be portrayed as weakness towards their children?
I think that there's probably models of that are at play, and I suppose I think it's important, if you are as a parent sharing emotions, that it feels that this is done in a safe way. So I suppose what I'm not saying is if you are really highly distressed at that moment, that necessarily sharing the intensity of that with your very young child is a good idea.
Yeah. I think that could be quite
but I suppose
traumatic.
this is the thing. It is doing the thinking about what of this I can share. And if I'm going to share it, how am I going to do it? And I think spending the time thinking a bit about that, and if you're co-parenting, maybe spending a bit of time thinking about that with the person that you're co-parenting with is a helpful thing to do. Because I think kind of denying the fact that there is kind of any change in your mental state as a parent to a child can feel very unsettling as well.
Yeah.
So it is finding that balance, which I think is quite important to be able to do. And I do agree that sort of in traditional models, it would be the case. Well, it's like, well, we just never, it's this kind of stiff upper lip. We'll never talk about anything that we feel, and kind of we just, you just do as we say, and sort of. And I think that in fairness, lots of parents these days probably do share a lot more about how they're feeling with their kids. But I think that has to be done in quite a thoughtful way.
Yes.
Really.
And age appropriate as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I can imagine you don't want to lean into oversharing where it feels where it's inappropriate. So you want to kind of get the balance there where it's age appropriate and, as you said, mindful, and you're not walking into a room complete like a mess, crying, like really low moods.
And I suppose that point that you also made, I was just thinking about that conversation you said you had with your child, where you were really clear about the fact that it wasn't their responsibility. So similarly, kind of thinking about a parent's emotions, it's the parent's responsibility.
Yeah.
And making that really clear that actually I'm sharing this with you so that you have a bit of an understanding of kind of what's going on. But fundamentally, it's not your responsibility.
100%.
I think is really, really important. So I thought that was like a really key point of sort of making that super clear, because children don't always necessarily know that, right?
Yeah, I'm so big on that, because I think in the circles that I'm in the families that I'm in, there's been a lot of the eldest has the responsibility to do this. The eldest is the role model for the younger kids or the younger, whether it's siblings or cousins. And I always just think, woof, that's a lot of responsibility to put on an 8-year-old, or sometimes it's even younger, like a 4-year-old, to be like the role model for like their younger siblings. And so having had people who kind of felt that weight of responsibility, I think I'm very aware that I don't want either of my kids to ever feel like they have the responsibility to look after another sibling. Because I've heard my daughter say that quite recently. It's like, oh, if mummy and daddy's not around, then I have to look after my brother. And I said, no. It will never be. There will always be another adult around. It will never be your responsibility. So she's already kind of said those kind of things to me. But also on the flip side, if me or my husband are feeling, it's not her responsibility to make us feel happy, sad, make us feel happy, or if we're sad to make us not feel sad, or if we're angry to calm us down. So I've been very clear with like, that's not your role that you play. And recently, this is a side tangent, but recently she started asking me what my job is. And so I'll tell her, I was like, this is what I do. And I said, what's your job? And then she'll be like, to play and to have fun.
Oh.
And I was like, spot on.
Perfect job description.
Yeah.
Right.
Or she'll say to go to work and use my laptop. She's got this little laptop. But that's what and I think that's kind of like, again, she's really young. When she gets older, I'm sure her role will change. But that's kind of what I want the kids' roles to be, like light, and not to be thinking about I'm the eldest, or I have this position within the family, and so for my responsibility is to do I'm really it's really not for us in the house.
I mean, I think as children get older as well, sort of what they then decide that their roles are going to be and what they bring to you, that I guess that changes over time as well. And in some ways that's the really tricky bit, isn't it, as a parent, where there'll be new things that are coming. It's always change. It's constant change. And you have to sort of be robust to respond to that, I think, in real time, with whatever challenges that your children are bringing to you, or kind of whatever developments are coming. So, it's definitely a full-on gig. That is like, you know.
I think that's the understatement of the year.
Quite.
Yeah. There's this meme, and people who listen to this on audio will not be able to see what I'm going to do in a moment, but there's a meme that I've seen on Instagram, and it's like, this is what parenthood is, and it's this person on this roller coaster, not strapped in, and it's not like a traditional roller coaster, it's like one of those circular, I guess, fairground rides, and the guy's not strapped in, and they're like, yeah, this is what parenthood looks like, and it's just this man just like flying around. Yeah, just like flying around and being like, his face is all like, whoa, because he's been knocked around left, right, and centre.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah, that feels like an accurate depiction of
I think that's probably
motherhood.
Reasonable.
I wanted to touch on what I had mentioned earlier. It was around kind of parenting. I think you had mentioned like parenting is quite stressful, and I suggested, is it because parenting now is a bit more of a verb and there is a lot that comes under the job description or definition of being a parent, and from starting really young. And I guess the reason I mentioned that is I remember when she wasn't even one yet. I think my daughter was like 6 or 7 months. It was her first Christmas. And I was in a few mum group chats, and they were talking about what to do on your first Christmas. And this must be this special thing. And I had a few activities booked. I think I must have had like 3 or 4 for her first Christmas. It was ridiculous. Anyways, and a few of them got cancelled because it snowed, and there was other reasons why we wasn't able to go. So we didn't do any Christmas activities that year. And I distinctly remember saying to my husband, this is her first Christmas and we're not doing anything. This is like, what do you mean? This is
just keeping her alive.
Yeah. I was like, we're not keeping this, like a special moment, and everyone's doing things and we're doing nothing. And Stefan was like, look at her, like she's like a baby. And now she's gotten older, I'm like, oh, this is like what you can do with your kids. And like, just to keep it really simple. Yes, last year we did something really simple in like a community centre, like nothing fancy. Didn't spend lots of money on land or anything like that, because that wasn't for us. And we decided to make the decision not to do that. But it just gets me thinking that there's so much expectation to do stuff. Like, celebrate your child's first Christmas when they're like 6, 7 months. Dress them up for Halloween in a little pumpkin outfit. Like, I guess how do you think doing all of that plays into the stresses alongside potentially doing paid work outside the house as well, and cooking and cleaning and all the other stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very stressful at the moment for parents. And so the US Surgeon General wrote this health advisory in 2024, which is called Parents Under Pressure, which I think was really good at being just very upfront about the fact that there is essentially a parenting mental health crisis at the moment. And there are lots of different factors that are playing into that, I think. So part of it is certainly expectation, but also, you know, it's quite clearly documented that the amount of sort of one-to-one time that you're spending with your child now is probably more than would have maybe been the case 30 years ago, for example, because you're doing so much more with them.
I saw that stat and I was like, oh my goodness, how is that
possible?
Well, how is that possible? How is the mathing?
Particularly because, you know, women are working more hours, parents are working more hours. There are huge financial costs obviously involved with raising a family, but housing costs are through the roof. Like, there's just so many different factors that make, I think at this point in time, parenting very, very tricky to do. And I guess this is something that, in a way, which was so helpful with kind of having this health advisory just written and it just being really clear that this is a public health issue. And I'm very much hoping that within the UK, something similar will be produced fairly soon, because we're definitely seeing it. The parents are really doing their best, but this is a very, very difficult gig. And I guess in terms of the support that we as a society provide for parents, I just think there are lots and lots of parents who are really struggling at the moment. There is definitely that element of expectation of, actually, are you the Instagram parent who can kind of put your child in a pumpkin outfit at Halloween? But I mean, and that's definitely one end of the spectrum. And I think in a way that can be just, an absolute snowball effect, right? It can just be very stressful. But I think there is other parts that are kind of, do you have stable housing for your family? Do you have access to green spaces for your family? What, where are all of these supports? Where is that? And if you have parents who are working long hours in order to pay for their families, I think the space for children to be able to spend time with their parents becomes more limited. And I think that's tricky. I think that's very tricky. So I guess with that in mind, when we have parents probably as stressed as they are at the moment, which is certainly my view, that I think that a lot of parents that we're seeing at the moment are probably the most stressed out that they've ever been in their lives. For them to then be kind of very emotionally attuned to their children, to be able to meet their needs and be calm. We're just kind of wondering how possible is this at this point in time? And what needs to change in order for this to become more possible for families? I think that's a really important conversation that needs to be had.
Do you think that conversation is one to have within the family unit or as a society?
I think it has to happen at every level. I think within family units, it's really important acknowledging the fact that this is stressful for most families to some extent. But also to kind of then think much more as a community about the fact that actually, how do we as a community support the parents who are within it? How do we support families? I guess in the UK and in most Western civilized communities at the moment, I would say that it's very much this nuclear family that's very prevalent. And this idea that there is then lots of support for the parents, that there will be aunties and uncles and neighbours and kind of this really idyllic view. It just doesn't exist for most families. So I guess then you think a little bit about, well, how do these adults who are looking after these children get supported? How do they get taken care of? And I think in reality, lots of parents probably aren't been taken care of. And that's really worrying, actually. That's really worrying. And sort of, I guess, there was a really interesting systematic review that was written a few years ago, and it was looking at sort of resilience factors in children. And like one of the most important resilience factors is actually having lots of other people supporting your parents. Which is really important. So
having lots of people supporting the parents in turn makes the children more resilient.
It does, because if your parent is very stressed and they can't attune to you and they can't, they're not able to do the parenting or to do the parenting at the level that's kind of needed for the child, knowing that there are other people that your child loves and trusts and are safe with is hugely important as a safety net. And that they can step in, and maybe that they go to grandma's after school for a little bit, or they go and, spend a bit of time with a coach at school or whoever that might be. I think the concern is that for lots and lots of children, that's just not a possibility. And it's either their parents or nothing. And I think that puts an enormous amount of pressure on the parents to constantly be well, to constantly to be able to parent, actually. And I just think that this is kind of one of the pieces that we really need to think about if we're going to really think about the children's mental health crisis. We have to link it to the parenting mental health crisis.
That's just it, really sad. And it makes me think that the systems are just not there. Like, let's be real, the systems are just not there to support parents and in turn to support children, especially now lots of employers are saying come back into the office, so how am I meant to be there with my children unless they go to nursery or childcare 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So where do I get to put my stamp in and like help to grow them and mold them and shape them and instill values and all of that stuff? How am I there? And then, as you said, if you don't have the family support, and if it's grandparents, you're relying on grandparents who are well, healthy, grandparents who live close by, grandparents who are not working. So you're like, you're hoping that they would have some kind of financial security or financial freedom at that point. A lot of things kind of have to align to have grandparent support. And then with friends and other family members, it's hard. I mean, what I find particularly hard is I've got a lot of mum friends, but we kind of all have kids the same age. So everyone's in the struggle. And I don't, I would love to be able to help some of them out, but I don't necessarily want to have their kids on top of the two that I already have. Yeah. So then it just ends up, and not because anything with their child, it's just that ends up being a lot. And even if it is me and my husband, it's like me and my husband with 3 kids, that all kind of close in age and stuff like that. It, it ends up being a lot. But I am going to try and take better steps at doing life with people and, building up those relationships. Because, when you're run down, it definitely has an impact on the kids.
I think also, I suppose, thinking about those relationships which sustain you, and it's kind of, for example, I've got quite a few friends who don't have children, for example, and there's something really nice about being able to maybe go for a dinner or go and see a film, and we're just not going to talk about small people for the next few hours. And it's kind of, there's something really important about thinking about how you refill your cup and the different relationships that you have that kind of help to sustain you, I think are really important. But I also think for parents, it feels like a luxury often to be like, I'm going to spend this time with my friends and we're not going to talk about children at all. And I think a lot of parents and friends who are parents at the moment really struggle with that, actually, because it's this time issue. It's kind of where do you find the time to do these things? And I suppose it's to that kind of earlier comment, thinking a little bit about where do you make the investment in yourself so that you can be robust as a parent. I think we have to take this seriously. I think kind of the trope of the exhausted parent who never sleeps, who, is constantly trying to do 30 things at once, is something that's really typified, right? If you watch Motherland or Working Mums, and every mum is just super frazzled. But I think the reality is that is really unsustainable. And is that what it means to be a working mother? That you're constantly frazzled and exhausted and unable to think, and, and if that's the case, that's, how are you going to be able to sort of do all of the mental acrobatics you need to do with your 3-year-old child? You know what I mean? I mean, I guess that's the thing about sort of, can we change that narrative that actually, can we have working mothers who feel happy and supported? And what do we need to do in order to make sure that becomes a reality? It sort of feels like that's a fantasy. And that to me is really worrying, actually, that we sort of can't as a society accept that could be possible.
I struggle to accept that could be possible.
but then I wonder about that, sort of, why is that the case? What are the sort of role models that we have? Or how do we start to think about how we build our lives in a way that can become possible?
Yeah.
Because certainly if we want our children to be thriving, we have to have the presence of mind to meet them where they're at. And I think if you're trying to do 40 things at the same time, it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, that's my view.
Yeah. Super quick interruption. If you are enjoying this episode and you think someone would benefit from it, please share with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe. Now back to the episode. So moving on slightly, what impact do you think reflective parenting can have, not only on the child's resilience, but also on the parent's mental health?
I think taking the time to really think about how things are going on at home, the conversations that are having, or if there are certain behaviours that are repeating themselves, is a really, really helpful thing. I think firstly to demonstrate to your child that you're taking this seriously and that actually you want to think about how things can change. I think that's the first thing that's really important. But also, I think if you're able to reflect and try and think about what could change, or what factors need to kind of be thought about, whether it is the case that actually you're doing 45 things at the same time, and can some of these things be dropped, or if you need help in a certain area, who you can maybe recruit to help you with that.
Yeah.
I think it's just regaining your own presence of mind is a really, really valuable thing to do as a parent. And I think that
Regaining your presence of mind.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think just being able to say, actually, you know, I need to close some of the tabs in my brain today, so that actually when my child might come with whatever it is that they come with, you know, I'm ready. And I think parents want to do that. By and large, parents do want to be able to do that. I don't think it's kind of that parents are not choosing to do this. It's just, I think we have to be much, much more intentional about the fact that if we have 101 responsibilities that are going on, it's very, very hard and you can't necessarily predict when your child is going to come with you with the thing that they need to talk about. But it's hard to not feel overwhelmed if there are so many things that are happening. So in a way, I think it's much better to sort of have the practice of kind of taking a bit of time and reflecting and thinking, rather than wait for things to really get to a crisis point.
Okay.
But in my experience, you know, not doing the thinking can really lead to then suddenly there is a crisis point. And then actually at that point, everyone in the family is somewhere where they don't particularly want to be. So I guess it's just kind of, you know, like with any other practice, it's doing something consistently is the thing that's probably going to make the biggest change, I think, to that sense of feeling calm, feeling able to kind of meet your child where they are.
And I think you called it kind of growing that muscle, flexing that muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is flexing that muscle, because I guess this is the thing, you know, it's such a skill to be able to really, really listen to your child and really hear what they're saying, and to just be able to say the right thing at the right time. And actually lots of parents, many parents are extremely good at this. But I think if we don't give parents the opportunity to do this because they are so stressed by all of the other things that are going on in their life, I think those moments to connect get missed. And that's one thing that's on my mind at the moment, that I don't think that necessarily it's that parents are not listening or not wanting to listen to their child. I think it's just we have to be able to talk more openly about the fact that to do this well, you need to make the space.
Okay, I think that's probably I think the key takeaways from me is making the space to do the reflective work and the thinking, being curious. I think that's a big one. And then again, age appropriately, being vulnerable with your child. I've got 2 more questions. I hear a lot on kind of various different kind of talk shows or podcasts, or the topic at least comes up around children needing to be resilient and kind of not being wimps, or I think there's even an episode on, for anyone who watches or knows of Bluey, like one of the cat, there's an episode that goes on where one of the characters is like, oh, we're raising a nation of wimps. It's the episode to do with Pass the Parcel. And so I guess with that in mind, and I think a lot of parents as well feel like I need to prepare my child for the realities of the world. It's a harsh world out there and I need them to be equipped and ready for it. How can a parent ensure their child is resilient? Let's assume that their cup is full and they're getting what they need and their resource and everything. What kind of tips, or say tips and tricks, that's not the right word, but what kind of things can parents be doing to help with that resilience piece of their children? Or what they need to be considering or thinking about? And when does resilience start? Is it quite like preschooler years, toddler years, or is it something that you're more focused on when they're kind of in school, 5, 6, 7?
No, I would say from infancy.
Oh, from infancy. Okay, I wasn't expecting that answer.
I think that the moment that you're born, and I suppose this is kind of the thinking that you know, if you're thinking about infant psychotherapy, or you're thinking about sort of I guess, that discipline from the moment that you're born and you're interacting with the world. I guess you're learning how to be within the world. And for me, this is very much what resilience is. It's kind of, how do you exist within the world and find your space and your place? So you're always learning as a child, as a baby, as a all of those different stages. And I guess you learn through experience. I mean, that's how children learn, don't they? They have to go through some things, and they need to come back to somewhere where they feel supported and understood to kind of process those things in a way. So I don't necessarily have a bag of tips and tricks as to kind of how to have the super resilient child. But what I would say is, kind of from speaking with young people, many of whom are just extraordinarily resilient. I think the things that I've noticed, some of the characteristics that I've noticed, is that they have been able to find people to be able to kind of help them.
Okay.
And I think that's a really important thing that children have sort of are, should be being encouraged. It's not that we're saying that kind of, we're expecting you to be able to just get everything right the first take.
Yeah.
And it's also not that we're saying that we're expecting you to never have any difficulties in your life. But that's the whole point of having kind of the big network around you. When these things happen, because they will, when difficult things happen, these people who love you will be there.
Okay.
And I suppose that's the thing to me, which is really, really important, is that they are aware of the fact that they're not alone. And yeah, I mean, I think that that's the really helpful thing that I've seen that really resilient kids are able to do, is that they're very resourceful, actually.
I find that really interesting that children, from your experience, are able to resource themselves and like kind of connect with the people that they need to. And I think about how hard it is sometimes for adults to do that, to go and reach out to the support that they need. And
I think it's definitely something to encourage, and to also think a little bit about how you teach a child kind of how not to be afraid of the world, how to find people that you can trust, what to do if actually you think that somebody might be dangerous, kind of how do you... Those are conversations that happen over a period of time.
Yeah.
But it's also that thing about the nuclear family in some ways, where if the only people you're ever taught to really trust are your parents, I think it then becomes a bit harder to think about, well, actually, if I do need to kind of have the advice and support of somebody else, how do I go about doing that?
Yeah. I've never even thought of it like that. Yeah. 100%.
I think it's important to kind of, to be able to start to have those conversations about the fact that sometimes mum and dad are not necessarily going to have all the answers actually, but we can help think a little bit about who might be able to help you with this. But I definitely think that those children who are able to ask and receive help when things are difficult tend to fare better.
And not just always leaning on their immediate family, whether that would be like mum, dad, or whoever that would be for them.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's and I suppose that's kind of one of the trends that I've definitely seen. But also, I guess, going to that point where your parents might not always be in a position to be able to help you in the way that you need helping at that point in time. And that's okay. That's okay if it's been built in that there will be other people who can, who are able to kind of meet you where you are, hear what you're saying, kind of, and attune to you, really. I think those things are really powerful and really important. But I think a little bit of planning and thinking needs to go into sort of how that network gets built up. Yeah.
Going back to that word intentional, a bit of intentionality needs to be in there. And then a final question, and it's something that I ask kind of all our guests, is what's the one word or phrase that you would use to describe your motherhood journey?
Oh, an adventure.
Ooh.
For sure. For sure.
Tell us more.
I mean, I think it is an emotional roller coaster in many ways, but it's also exciting and unexpected, and I think very educational. There's lots of things that you kind of learn along the way as well. So I think all the good bits of an adventure is probably kind of what my experience has been. And I'm sure I'm not alone.
Yeah, I agree. I like that one. Definitely an adventure for sure. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I've left with like lots of kind of my questions being answered. And then I think, as I said before, kind of being curious, leaning into that vulnerability and doing that real reflective work as being like the 3 core kind of themes I think we've been talking on. So yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
I went back to work after my maternity leave and I struggled. I struggled to go to work, to maintain a house, to cook, to clean, to look after 2 toddlers. It was just a lot. The mental load was insane. My to-do list was so long. And I was thinking, what can I do to make my life easier? What can I do to kind of outsource the stuff I have on my to-do list? And the first thing that came to mind was food. And so I turned to HelloFresh. I went online, I picked the recipes that I wanted, the ingredients was delivered straight to my door, and I was able to cook freshly cooked meals for my family in 30 to 40 minutes with the help of my daughter. And just like that, the mental load of having to cook, which I absolutely hated at that point, had completely gone in the bin. So for all my listeners of the podcast, I'm giving you a discount for HelloFresh. So you have one less thing to think about. Go to my show notes, click on the link, and give yourself that discount of HelloFresh today. Remove that extra thing of your to-do list and make your mental load a lot lighter. Check out my show notes now.